My name is Alex, and I never thought I'd find myself in this position, questioning everything about my marriage and my life. I'm 38 years old, married to Melissa, who's 35. We've been together for 12 years, married for 10. We have 2 kids, Liam, who's 8, and Sophie, who's 6. Up until recently, I would have told you that our marriage was solid, that we were happy. I would have been lying. Melissa and I met through mutual friends at a party back in college. She was smart, funny, and had this energy about her that I couldn't resist. We hit it off immediately, and it wasn't long before we were inseparable. We moved in together after 2 years of dating, and when I proposed, she said yes without hesitation. Life seemed perfect until it wasn't. Looking back, I realize now that there were signs, little things that I ignored because I trusted her completely. Maybe that's why this hurts so much, because I never saw it coming. The first hint of trouble was about 6 months ago. Melissa had started working out more, which wasn't unusual in itself. She'd always been health conscious. But she became obsessed with it, going to the gym at odd hours, buying new workout gear every other week, and always talking about this new personal trainer she had. I tried not to think much of it. I was proud of her dedication, and frankly, I was busy with work. I'm in sales, which means long hours and constant travel. Melissa understood that when we got married, but lately, she seemed more distant. Our conversations became shorter, less meaningful, and our sex life took a nosedive. She always had an excuse: too tired, not feeling well, stressed out. I wanted to believe her, so I did. Then there were the late-night texts. I noticed them when I was getting ready for bed one night. She was sitting on the couch, her phone screen lighting up every few seconds. I asked her who she was talking to, and she brushed it off as just a group chat with some friends. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Melissa had always been open with her phone, leaving it around, never putting a password on it. But now, it was always on her, and she'd quickly turn the screen away whenever I walked by. Still, I tried to ignore it. I figured she was just going through something, maybe work stress or something she didn't want to burden me with. I convinced myself that it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it started to grow. About a month ago, she started going out more, claiming it was with her girlfriends. At first, I believed her, but then the stories started to sound too rehearsed, too perfect. I'd ask her about her night, and she'd give me a detailed account of everything they did, down to what they ordered for dinner. But when I casually asked her friends about those nights out, their stories didn't quite match up. Last week, it all came to a head. She went out on a Friday night, saying she was meeting her friends for drinks. She kissed me goodbye, and there was nothing unusual about it, just a normal night, or so I thought. But something inside me snapped that night. Maybe it was the weeks of doubt and suspicion piling up, or maybe it was the way she looked at me, almost as if she was daring me to question her. I decided I couldn't just sit by anymore. That's when I started going through her things. I'm not proud of it, but I was desperate to find out what was going on. I started with her phone, but she'd gotten smart: no suspicious messages, no incriminating pictures. It was like she'd wiped it clean. Then I checked her emails, but again, nothing. Finally, I went through her purse, and that's when I found it: a hotel keycard tucked away in her wallet. My heart sank as I held it in my hand. This was it. This was the proof I'd been dreading, the confirmation that my wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted for over a decade, was cheating on me. My mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline, trying to figure out when this started and how long it had been going on. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but I knew I needed to stay calm, to think this through. So, I waited. I waited for her to come home, for her to walk through the door and lie to my face one more time. When she did, I asked her how her night was, and she gave me the same rehearsed speech she always did. I wanted to scream at her, to throw the key card in her face, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded, told her I was tired, and went to bed. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. How could she do this to me? To our family? Was this a one-time thing, or had she been cheating on me for months? Years? I felt like my world was crumbling around me, like everything I thought I knew was a lie. The next morning, I decided I needed to know for sure. I wasn't going to confront her yet, I needed more evidence. I needed to catch her in the act, to see it with my own eyes, no matter how much it would hurt. I started planning, figuring out how to follow her, how to track her movements without her knowing. It felt dirty, underhanded, but I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. This was the beginning of the end, and I knew there was no turning back. The following week was one of the longest and most agonizing of my life. Every moment I spent with Melissa felt like a lie, every smile she gave me felt like a dagger to the heart. I couldn't look at her without imagining her with someone else, wondering what lies she was going to tell me next. I had to keep up the facade, pretend that everything was normal, even though I was dying inside. But I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I needed more proof, something undeniable that I could confront her with. I knew I couldn't trust her friends, and there was no way I was going to get any more information from her phone. So I did what I never thought I would do, I hired a private investigator. It wasn't an easy decision. I felt like I was crossing a line, like I was sinking to a level I never thought I'd reach. But what choice did I have? If Melissa was cheating on me, I needed to know for sure. I needed concrete evidence, not just the gut feeling that had been gnawing at me for months. The investigator was a no-nonsense kind of guy. He didn't judge me or ask too many questions. He just wanted to know the basics, her schedule, the names of her friends, where she liked to hang out. He asked for a recent picture of her and details about the nights she was most likely to be out. I gave him everything he needed, feeling sick to my stomach the whole time. After I handed over the information, there was nothing to do but wait. And waiting was torture. Every time Melissa went out, I wondered if it would be the night I finally got the answers I dreaded. I tried to keep myself busy, focusing on work and the kids, but my mind was always somewhere else, replaying the possibilities over and over. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the investigator called. He had something. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to his calm, professional voice on the other end of the line. She met someone last night, he said. They went to a hotel. I felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. Even though I'd been expecting it, hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. I could barely breathe as I asked him to tell me everything. He gave me the details, and with every word, the image of my wife shattered more and more. She'd met the guy at a restaurant downtown, some trendy spot that we'd never been to together. They had dinner, sat close, talked quietly. Afterward, they didn't go their separate ways. Instead, they walked out together, arms around each other like they were a couple, like this was something they did all the time. The investigator followed them to a hotel just outside the city, the kind of place that didn't ask too many questions. They went inside, and that was it. The investigator stayed just long enough to be sure, then left. I've got pictures, he said. And a video of them going into the hotel. I closed my eyes, feeling the bile rise in my throat. This was it, the proof I'd been waiting for, the evidence that my wife was cheating on me. There was no more doubt, no more hoping that maybe I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. Melissa was having an affair, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Send them to me, I said, my voice hollow. When I hung up, I just sat there for a while, staring at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt numb, like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now I had to decide what to do about it. The email came a few minutes later, with an attachment labeled evidence. I didn't want to open it, didn't want to see what I already knew. But I had to. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to make it real. I clicked on the attachment, and there they were, pictures of Melissa with another man. He was younger, maybe in his early 30s, with a smug look on his face as he walked next to my wife. They looked comfortable together, like they'd done this 100 times before. In one picture, he had his arm around her waist, pulling her close. In another, she was laughing at something he said, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in months. But the worst part was the video. It was short, just a few seconds long, but it was enough. It showed them walking into the hotel together, disappearing through the door without a second glance. I could barely watch it. My stomach turned as I realized what must have happened after that door closed behind them. I closed the email and sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. This was it. This was the moment that everything changed. I could never look at Melissa the same way again. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who could smile and laugh with another man while I was at home with our kids, completely oblivious. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, to throw the evidence in her face and demand an explanation. But what would that accomplish? She'd probably just lie, try to talk her way out of it like she always did. Or worse, she'd blame me, say it was my fault for not being around enough, for not giving her what she needed. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. But I couldn't stay in that house with her, pretending that everything was okay. So, I made up an excuse about a work trip, packed a bag, and left. I didn't tell her when I'd be back. I didn't know myself. I drove for hours, not really caring where I ended up. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. Eventually, I found a cheap motel off the highway and checked in. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I spent the night lying on the lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. All night, the images of Melissa and her lover played in my mind, like a movie I couldn't turn off. I thought about our kids, about what this would do to them. I thought about our life together, all the memories we'd made, and how they were now tainted by her betrayal. And I thought about what I was going to do next. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't just let this go. I needed to confront her, to make her face what she'd done. But I also needed to protect myself, to make sure I didn't get screwed over in the process. So I made a plan. I'd gather more evidence, enough to make sure she couldn't weasel her way out of it. And then I'd confront her, on my terms. But before I could do any of that, I needed to get back home and face the reality of my situation. The drive back was agonizing, every mile bringing me closer to the inevitable confrontation. I kept replaying how it would go in my head, the words I would say, how she would react. But no matter how many times I imagined it, I knew it would be worse in real life. When I finally pulled into the driveway, my heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was going to find when I walked through that door, and part of me didn't want to know. But I couldn't avoid it any longer. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked inside. Melissa was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she made breakfast for the kids. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just spent the night in a hotel with another man. "Hey, you're back early," she said, her voice cheerful. "I didn't expect you home until tonight." I could barely look at her. Yeah, the trip got cut short. She didn't seem to notice the coldness in my voice. "That's great. The kids will be so happy to see you." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't do this now. Not with the kids around. I needed to wait until they were at school, until it was just the two of us. But it was hard, so hard, to sit there and pretend that everything was okay when all I wanted to do was scream at her, demand answers, and make her feel the pain she'd caused me. I spent the morning going through the motions, helping Liam and Sophie get ready for school, packing their lunches, and driving them to the bus stop. Melissa was her usual self, chatty, affectionate, like nothing had changed. And maybe, in her mind, nothing had. Maybe she thought I would never find out, that she could keep this secret forever. But I knew. And soon, she would know that I knew. When the kids were finally out of the house, I turned to her, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating all at once. "Melissa," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm, "we need to talk." Melissa looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from casual to cautious as she heard the tension in my voice. "Sure, Alex. What's on your mind?" she asked, setting her phone down on the counter. Her voice was light, but I could see the hint of wariness in her eyes. She knew something was coming. I stared at her for a moment, trying to collect my thoughts, to decide how to begin. Part of me wanted to ease into it, to give her a chance to come clean on her own. But the anger boiling inside me wouldn't let that happen. I needed to hear it from her, to make her admit what she'd done. I found something, I began, my voice low but steady. Something that I think you should explain. Her eyes flickered with confusion, or maybe it was fear. What do you mean? What did you find? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the hotel key card, holding it up between us. This, I said. I found this in your purse. Her face went pale, and she took a small step back, as if the key card were a weapon aimed at her. For a few seconds, she just stared at it, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she looked up at me, her expression shifting into one of desperate denial. Alex, I can explain, she stammered, her voice trembling. Go ahead, I said coldly, crossing my arms over my chest. I'm listening. She hesitated, clearly scrambling to come up with a story that would make this all go away. But there was no story that could fix this. No explanation that would make what she'd done okay. I was going to tell you, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was going to explain everything, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the tense silence of the kitchen. You didn't want to hurt me? Melissa, do you have any idea what this feels like? Finding out that my wife has been sneaking around behind my back? And you didn't want to hurt me? She flinched at my words, tears welling up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I'd seen her cry before, watched her use those tears to get out of trouble, to twist situations in her favor. But not this time. How long has this been going on? I demanded. How long have you been cheating on me? She shook her head, her voice cracking as she spoke. It's not what you think, Alex. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Melissa? I snapped, cutting her off. Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear. You're seeing someone else. You're cheating on me. She started to cry in earnest now, the tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you, Alex. I never wanted this to happen. But it did happen, I shot back. And now you need to tell me the truth. Who is he? She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she looked down at the floor, her shoulders slumping in defeat. His name is Eric, she said quietly. He's my personal trainer. Of course. The personal trainer. I should have seen it sooner, should have put the pieces together. I felt a fresh wave of anger and disgust wash over me as I pictured them together, the man who was supposed to be helping her stay fit, instead helping her destroy our marriage. How long? I asked, my voice cold. How long have you been sleeping with him? She winced at the bluntness of the question but answered anyway. A few months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. It started out innocent, I swear. We were just talking, just friends. But then. I don't know. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, my anger rising again. You don't accidentally cheat on your husband, Melissa. You made a choice. You chose to betray me, to betray our family. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking with the force of it. I'm sorry, Alex. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at her, my mind racing, trying to process everything she was telling me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that she really was sorry, that she regretted what she'd done. But the other part of me knew better. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a conscious decision, one that she made over and over again every time she went to see him, every time she lied to me. What did you think was going to happen, Melissa? I asked, my voice laced with bitterness. Did you think I'd never find out? That you could keep this secret forever? She shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. No, I knew it would come out eventually. But I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to fix it. Fix it? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You think you can fix this? How, Melissa? How do you fix a marriage after you've torn it apart? She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there, crying, looking more pathetic than I'd ever seen her. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just angry. Angry at her for doing this to me, to our family. Angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not doing something to stop it before it got this far. I want you to leave, I said finally, my voice flat. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. What? I want you to leave, I repeated. Go stay with one of your friends, go to a hotel, I don't care. Just get out of this house. I can't stand to look at you right now. Alex, please, she begged, stepping toward me. Let's talk about this. Let's try to work it out. No! I shouted, the sound echoing through the kitchen. There's nothing to work out, Melissa. You cheated on me. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I can't just forgive that. I need time. I need space. She opened her mouth to argue, but then she saw the look on my face and seemed to realize that there was no point. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears away, trying to compose herself. Okay, she said quietly. I'll go. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, and I stood there, listening to the sound of her footsteps as she went upstairs. A few minutes later, she came back down, a small overnight bag slung over her shoulder. She paused at the front door, looking back at me with red-rimmed eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered one last time. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stood there, watching as she walked out the door, as the woman I loved for over a decade became a stranger. When the door closed behind her, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. I felt exhausted, like I'd just gone through a battle. And in a way, I had. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I needed to figure out what I was going to do next, how I was going to move forward from this. But first, I needed to get my head straight. I needed to calm down, to think clearly. I couldn't make any decisions in the state I was in. I walked over to the couch and sat down, burying my face in my hands. The house was quiet now, too quiet. The silence was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I felt like I was drowning, like I was being swallowed up by the weight of everything that had just happened. How could she do this to me? How could she throw away everything we had, everything we'd built together? I thought about our wedding day, the vows we'd made, the promises we'd kept, or at least, the ones I'd kept. I thought about the kids, about how this was going to affect them, how they would react when they found out. They loved their mother. How was I supposed to tell them that she wasn't the person they thought she was? That their family was falling apart? I stayed like that for a long time, my thoughts swirling around in my head, each one more painful than the last. Eventually, I got up and went to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the glass, spilling water all over the counter. I cursed under my breath, feeling like I was falling apart at the seams. But I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. I needed to keep it together, for the kids, if not for myself. I had to be strong, had to figure out what to do next. I had no idea what the future held. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Melissa, if I could ever trust her again. I didn't know if our marriage could survive this. But right now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting through the next few hours, the next few days. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, wandering around the house, trying to keep myself busy. I cleaned the kitchen, even though it didn't need it. I did laundry, even though the hamper was barely full. I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. My mind kept drifting back to the confrontation with Melissa, to the image of her walking out the door with that overnight bag, leaving me behind to pick up the pieces of our shattered life. As the day wore on, the kids came home from school, their laughter filling the house, breaking the oppressive silence. I forced myself to smile, to act like everything was normal, even though I felt like I was dying inside. They were too young to understand what was going on, too innocent to be dragged into the mess that their mother and I had created. But eventually, they would have to know. I would have to explain to them why mommy wasn't coming home, why our family was falling apart. The thought of that conversation made my stomach churn, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. After dinner, after the kids were in bed, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the empty seat across from me. This was where Melissa usually sat, where we would talk about our days, about the kids, about our plans for the future. But now, all of that felt like a lie. Our future, the one we'd talked about so many times, was gone. I couldn't stay in this house. Not tonight. Not with all the memories haunting me, the reminders of what I'd lost. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, not sure where I was going, only knowing that I needed to get out, to clear my head. As I drove aimlessly through the dark streets, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me again. The anger, the sadness, the overwhelming sense of betrayal. I had loved Melissa with everything I had, and she had thrown it all away for some fling with a guy she barely knew. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could she do this to me? To us? Was I that blind, that naive, to believe that our marriage was strong enough to withstand anything? Or had I just been fooling myself, ignoring the signs that were there all along? Eventually, I found myself parked outside a bar, the neon sign flickering in the night. I didn't usually drink, but tonight was an exception. Tonight, I needed something to numb the pain, to dull the edges of the reality I was living in. I walked into the bar, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hitting me like a wave. The place was half empty, a few regulars sitting at the bar, nursing their drinks, lost in their own thoughts. I sat down at a table in the corner, ordering a whiskey and downing it in one go. The burn in my throat was a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. I stayed there for hours, drinking more than I should have, trying to forget, trying to escape. But no matter how much I drank, the memories kept coming back, the images of Melissa with another man, the sound of her voice as she confessed to everything. By the time I finally stumbled out of the bar, the streets were empty, the city asleep. I got back in my car and sat there for a long time, staring out the windshield, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I needed to make a decision. But right now, all I could think about was how much I hated her, how much I wanted to hurt her like she had hurt me. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after that disastrous night, I woke up with a pounding headache and a mind that was far from clear. I had slept in the guest room, the bed unfamiliar and uncomfortable. But it wasn't the bed that kept me tossing and turning all night. It was the rage, the hurt, and the overwhelming need to do something, anything, that would make Melissa understand just how deeply she had cut me. I sat up in bed, rubbing my temples, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep and the fog from last night's drinking. The house was quiet, the kids still asleep, and Melissa was nowhere in sight. I knew she wouldn't be back anytime soon, not after the way I'd kicked her out. That was fine with me. I needed space to think, to plan my next move. I walked downstairs and made myself a cup of coffee, the routine helping to calm my nerves, to steady my thoughts. I stared out the kitchen window, watching the sun slowly rise, casting long shadows across the lawn. This was my home, my life, and she had trampled all over it with her lies and deceit. I couldn't let her get away with it. I couldn't just sit back and let her walk all over me. I'd been a good husband, hell, a great husband. I provided for her, took care of her, and did everything I could to make her happy. And this was how she repaid me? With betrayal? With some cheap affair? The more I thought about it, the more the anger bubbled up inside me, threatening to boil over. I wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the same pain that was tearing me apart. I wanted her to understand that actions have consequences, that she couldn't just waltz back into our lives like nothing happened. But how? How could I make her feel the way I did, make her realize the depth of her betrayal? I wasn't the type to lash out physically, and I wasn't interested in some dramatic confrontation that would only give her more power. No, I needed something that would hit her where it hurt, something that would shake her to her core. As I sipped my coffee, an idea began to take shape, something that would make her pay in a way she wouldn't expect. Melissa was proud, always concerned with appearances and how others saw her. She liked to present herself as the perfect wife, the loving mother, the woman who had it all together. If there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was public humiliation. I set my coffee cup down, my hands no longer shaking as I felt the first stirrings of a plan forming in my mind. Melissa had built her life around this image of perfection, this facade that she showed to the world. But I knew the truth now. I knew the cracks in that facade, and I was going to exploit them. I walked into the living room, where her laptop was still sitting on the coffee table. She had left it there the last time she was home, and I knew it contained everything I needed. I powered it on, and when the login screen appeared, I smirked. Melissa, always thinking she was so clever, had never bothered to change the password from something as predictable as our wedding anniversary. I was in within seconds, and the first thing I did was check her email. She wasn't foolish enough to leave anything incriminating in plain sight, but that wasn't what I was looking for. I needed something else, something that would let me dig deeper. It didn't take long to find it. A folder marked personal, buried within her documents. It was password protected, but again, Melissa was nothing if not consistent. A quick guess with the kids' birthdays, and I was in. Inside the folder were dozens of files, pictures, emails, even videos, everything she had meticulously organized and hidden away. Some were old, from happier times, but most were recent. And there, in the middle of it all, were the pictures of her and Eric, her so-called personal trainer. Pictures of them together at the gym, at restaurants, and even a few that made my stomach turn intimate, private moments that should never have existed in the first place. But it wasn't just the pictures that caught my eye. It was the messages, the ones she thought she'd deleted but had backed up in this hidden folder. Flirtatious texts, emails filled with plans to meet up, and worse, discussions about me. About how she was bored, how she felt trapped in our marriage, how she needed an escape. It was all there, laid out in excruciating detail. I felt a fresh wave of anger and disgust wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to stay focused. This was exactly what I needed. This was how I would make her pay. I copied everything onto a flash drive and tucked it away in my pocket. This wasn't just about gathering evidence. This was about leverage, about having something over her that she couldn't deny or explain away. She might think she could talk her way out of anything, but not this time. This time, I had her cornered. But that was just the first step. I needed to take it further, to make sure that she understood the full extent of what she had done. I needed to make sure that she couldn't just sweep this under the rug and move on with her life as if nothing had happened. I opened her social media accounts next. She was connected to everyone, friends, family, colleagues. She was always careful about what she posted, always curating the perfect image. But I had control now, and I was going to use it. I started by posting some of the more damning pictures and messages to her accounts. Nothing too explicit, but enough to raise eyebrows, to make people start asking questions. I made sure to include just enough context so that anyone who saw them would understand exactly what was going on. There was no way she could explain this away, no way she could pretend that everything was fine. As I hit post, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't enough to make up for what she'd done, but it was a start. This was just the beginning of her reckoning. Next, I composed an email. I addressed it to a select few, her closest friends, her parents, her boss. I was careful with my words, making sure that the message was clear but not overtly malicious. I explained how Melissa had been unfaithful, how she had betrayed me and our family. I attached some of the more incriminating evidence, making sure to highlight the parts where she had lied and manipulated those around her. It was brutal, but it was necessary. Melissa had always cared so much about what people thought of her, about maintaining this image of the perfect wife and mother. I was going to strip that away from her, show everyone the truth she'd been hiding for so long. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, feeling a twisted sense of accomplishment. She wasn't going to be able to escape this. She wasn't going to be able to weasel her way out of the mess she had created. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more thing I needed to do, something that would drive the final nail into the coffin of her perfect little life. I knew she had a big event coming up, some charity gala she'd been organizing for months. It was a big deal for her, something she'd been looking forward to for a long time. She'd invited all her friends, all the people who mattered in her world. It was supposed to be her night, her moment to shine. I wasn't going to let that happen. I decided to show up at the event, uninvited but expected nonetheless. I would wait until she was in the spotlight, until she was basking in the praise and adoration of those around her. And then, I would confront her, right there in front of everyone. I pictured the scene in my mind: Melissa, dressed to the nines, standing on stage with a microphone in hand, smiling out at the crowd. And then me, walking up to her, exposing her for the fraud she was, revealing the truth to everyone she held dear. The thought of it sent a thrill through me. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized what was happening, when she saw the world she'd built come crashing down around her. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation, the same pain that she had caused me. But as the day of the event approached, I found myself feeling more conflicted. The anger was still there, burning hot and bright, but there was also something else, a sense of sadness, of loss. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the kind of person who sought out revenge, who took pleasure in someone else's pain. But Melissa had pushed me to this point, had driven me to become someone I didn't recognize. I knew I had to go through with it. I couldn't back down now, not after everything I'd done, everything I'd planned. But that didn't make it any easier. When the night of the gala finally arrived, I dressed in my best suit, trying to look the part of the supportive husband, the man who had everything under control. I drove to the venue, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The place was packed, filled with people who had no idea what was about to happen. I walked in, ignoring the curious glances, the polite smiles. I wasn't here to mingle or to enjoy myself. I was here for one reason and one reason only. I spotted Melissa almost immediately, standing near the front of the room, surrounded by her friends, laughing and chatting as if she didn't have a care in the world. She looked beautiful, radiant even, and for a moment, I almost hesitated. But then I remembered the pictures, the messages, the lies, and the anger came rushing back. I moved closer, staying on the outskirts of the crowd, waiting for the right moment. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty, but I kept my focus. This was it. This was the moment I had been planning for. When Melissa took the stage to give her speech, the room fell silent. She smiled out at the crowd, her voice steady and confident as she thanked everyone for coming, for supporting the cause. She looked so composed, so sure of herself, and it made me sick. I waited until she was halfway through her speech, until she was fully immersed in her role as the perfect hostess. Then, without a word, I walked up to the stage, my footsteps echoing in the hushed room. She saw me coming, and for a split second, her smile faltered. But she recovered quickly, giving me a curious look as if to say, "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped up to the microphone, gently pushing her aside. The crowd murmured in confusion, a few people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Sorry to interrupt," I began, my voice calm and measured, even as my heart raced in my chest. "But I think it's time everyone knew the truth." Melissa's eyes widened, her face draining of color as she realized what was happening. She tried to grab the microphone back, but I held it firmly, refusing to let her stop me. "I'm Alex," I said, my voice carrying through the room. "Melissa's husband. And I have something to share with all of you." I could feel the tension in the room, the curiosity, the anticipation. Melissa was standing frozen beside me, her eyes pleading with me to stop, but I didn't. I couldn't. "Melissa has been lying to all of you," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "She's been lying to me, to our family, to everyone she claims to care about. For months, she's been having an affair with another man. She's been sneaking around, betraying the trust of everyone in this room." The crowd gasped, a few people exchanging shocked glances. Melissa's friends, the ones who had always thought so highly of her, looked horrified, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. Melissa tried to speak, to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I pulled out the flash drive, holding it up for everyone to see. "I have proof," I said, my voice cold. "Pictures, messages, everything. If anyone doubts what I'm saying, feel free to take a look." I tossed the flash drive onto the stage, letting it clatter to the floor. The sound echoed through the silent room, a harsh reminder of the reality that Melissa had been trying so hard to hide. I hope you're all proud of the woman you've been supporting, I finished, stepping back from the microphone. Because this is who she really is. And with that, I walked off the stage, leaving Melissa standing there, her perfect world crumbling around her. I didn't look back, didn't wait to see the aftermath. I didn't need to. I knew I had done what I needed to do. As I walked out of the venue and into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of relief. The anger was still there, but it was tempered now, softened by the knowledge that I had taken control, that I had shown Melissa that she couldn't just walk all over me. But as I got into my car and drove away, the adrenaline began to wear off, and the weight of what I had done started to settle in. I had exposed her, humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. I had torn her down in the same way she had torn me down. But instead of feeling victorious, I just felt empty. I had taken my revenge, and it had been everything I imagined it would be. But it hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't erased the pain or the betrayal. All it had done was leave me standing alone, surrounded by the wreckage of a life I had once loved. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head, trying to figure out what to do next. The satisfaction I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a deep sense of loss. I had wanted to hurt her, to make her pay, but now that I had, I didn't know what to do with myself. Eventually, I pulled over to the side of the road, turning off the engine and sitting in the darkness. I rested my head against the steering wheel, feeling the exhaustion wash over me, the anger fading away, leaving only the sadness behind. I had gotten my revenge, but at what cost? After what I'd done at the gala, there was no turning back. The cat was out of the bag, and Melissa's perfect little world was in shambles. But even with all that, I knew deep down that it wasn't enough. Not yet. I wasn't done with this. I still had one more person to deal with, the man who had helped tear my life apart. Eric. I didn't know much about him, just bits and pieces from the files I'd pulled from Melissa's laptop and what the private investigator had told me. He was a personal trainer, younger than me by a few years, single, and apparently had no problem sleeping with another man's wife. The thought of him, of all the time he'd spent with Melissa, of the things they'd done together, made my blood boil. The anger that had subsided after confronting Melissa flared back up, white-hot and all-consuming. This wasn't just about Melissa's betrayal anymore. This was about the guy who thought he could come into my life, take what was mine, and walk away unscathed. He needed to understand that actions have consequences, and I was more than willing to deliver those consequences personally. I spent the next few days gathering information, planning out exactly how I was going to get to Eric. I wasn't interested in some petty confrontation, a shouting match that would leave me feeling just as empty as the showdown with Melissa. No, I needed to hit him where it hurt, where it would leave a lasting mark. Eric's entire life revolved around his job. He was a personal trainer at a high-end gym downtown, with a roster of wealthy clients who trusted him to keep them in shape. He was well-liked, respected even, and that was his weakness. His reputation, his standing in the community, those were the things he valued most. So that's what I would destroy. I started by doing a bit of reconnaissance. I'd already looked up everything I could about Eric online, his social media profiles, his client reviews, even the articles where he'd been interviewed about fitness trends. But that wasn't enough. I needed to see him in action, to understand how he operated. One morning, I parked outside the gym where Eric worked, watching as the early risers filed in, dressed in their expensive workout gear. The place was upscale, catering to the city's elite, and from what I could see, Eric fit right in. He arrived in a sleek sports car, all confidence and charm as he greeted his clients, flashing that same smile that had probably won Melissa over. I watched him for a while, observing how he interacted with people, how he moved through the gym with an air of authority. It was clear that he was good at what he did, too good. But that was all about to change. I spent the rest of the day putting my plan into motion. It started with a simple phone call to the gym's management, pretending to be a potential client. I asked a few questions about their trainers, inquired about Eric specifically, and then casually mentioned that I'd heard some concerning rumors about his behavior with female clients. The person on the other end of the line seemed taken aback, but they didn't press for details. I could tell they were already uneasy. Next, I created an anonymous email account and sent a message to the gym's owner, claiming to be a concerned spouse of one of Eric's clients. In the email, I detailed how I had discovered inappropriate messages between Eric and my wife, how he had been using his position as a trainer to take advantage of her vulnerability. I made sure to sound desperate, pleading with the owner to look into the matter before any more women were hurt. The seed was planted, but I didn't stop there. I knew that rumors alone wouldn't be enough to bring him down. I needed something more tangible, something that would leave no room for doubt. I went back to Melissa's laptop, digging through the files until I found what I was looking for: more pictures and messages, but this time, I focused on the ones that were explicit, the ones that left nothing to the imagination. I compiled everything into a file, carefully editing out any mention of Melissa's name, and added a few lines of text to make it seem like these messages were between Eric and multiple clients. Once I had everything ready, I sent the file to the gym's owner, along with another anonymous email. This time, I was more direct, stating that I had concrete evidence of Eric's misconduct and that if the gym didn't take action, I would go public with it. I attached the file and hit send, knowing that there was no way they could ignore it. The next few days were a waiting game. I kept tabs on Eric, watching as he continued with his daily routine, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I could only imagine what was going through his head when he got the call from his boss, when he was asked to come in for a meeting. I wasn't there to see it, but I knew the outcome. I'd made sure of that. A few days later, I returned to the gym, this time as a customer. I walked in, scanning the place until I spotted Eric, looking visibly shaken as he talked to someone who was clearly his boss. The confident, charming trainer I'd seen before was gone, replaced by someone who looked like they were fighting to keep their world from crumbling. The satisfaction I felt was intense, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I approached the reception desk, keeping an eye on Eric from the corner of my eye. When the receptionist asked if I needed help, I mentioned that I was interested in personal training and asked specifically for Eric. She hesitated, glancing over at him before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, but Eric isn't available right now," she said, her tone professional but tense. "Is there another trainer you'd like to work with?" I pretended to consider it for a moment before shaking my head. "No, thanks. I heard good things about him, but if he's not available, I'll look elsewhere." I turned to leave, but not before catching a glimpse of Eric's face as he overheard our conversation. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. It was clear that the rumors had started to spread, that his clients were starting to question his professionalism, his integrity. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I watched as Eric's life began to unravel. It started with clients canceling their sessions, one by one, until his once-packed schedule was almost empty. The gym's management, who had initially tried to handle the situation quietly, couldn't ignore the mounting complaints and concerns. They suspended him pending an investigation, and while they tried to keep it under wraps, word got out. People started talking, and soon enough, Eric's reputation was in tatters. But I wasn't done. I wanted to make sure that wherever he went, whatever he tried to do, this would follow him. I made sure that the file I had compiled found its way to every gym in the city, every place where he might try to find work. I posted the same anonymous messages on local forums, on social media, anywhere that people might see them. Eric tried to fight back, of course. He tried to deny the allegations, tried to claim that it was all a misunderstanding, that someone was out to get him. But the damage was done. No one wanted to be associated with a trainer who had a cloud of suspicion hanging over him. No one wanted to take the risk. The final nail in the coffin came when one of his former clients came forward, a woman who claimed that Eric had crossed the line with her during their sessions. She hadn't said anything before because she didn't want to cause trouble, but now that the truth was coming out, she felt it was her duty to speak up. Her story was the tipping point. The gym fired Eric, and he was blacklisted from every reputable fitness center in the area. I watched it all unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. Eric had thought he could mess with my life, take what was mine, and walk away without consequences. But now, he was the one who had lost everything. His career, his reputation, his future, they were all in ruins, just like my marriage. I knew I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even, but instead, there was just a hollow emptiness. The satisfaction I'd expected didn't last. It was like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. It might seem like it helps at first, but it only leaves you feeling worse. As I watched Eric's life crumble, I realized that no amount of revenge could truly fix what had been broken. Melissa had betrayed me, and Eric had played his part in it, but destroying him hadn't made the pain go away. It hadn't made me feel whole again. One evening, as I was driving home, I saw Eric. He was walking down the street, looking lost and defeated, a shadow of the man I'd seen swaggering around the gym just weeks earlier. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant, I saw something in him that caught me off guard: fear. Genuine, bone-deep fear. Not just for his career, but for his safety, for his future. He quickly looked away and hurried down the sidewalk, disappearing into the night. For a split second, I felt a twinge of pity, but it was quickly buried under the memories of what he had done. He deserved everything that had happened to him. He'd made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. But as I drove away, that hollow emptiness inside me only grew. I had taken my revenge on Melissa, and now on Eric, but it hadn't brought me the closure I'd been seeking. Instead, it had left me feeling more alone, more lost than ever before. I had burned down everything in my path, but now, standing among the ashes, I realized that I had nothing left to fight for. The man I'd been before all this, he was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who had let anger and pain consume him. As I parked in the driveway and turned off the engine, I sat there for a long time, staring at the darkened house in front of me. The kids were asleep, the house quiet, but the silence was deafening. I didn't know what to do next. The revenge I'd sought had left me with nothing but more questions, more doubts, and a growing sense of regret. The battle was over, but there was no victory here. Only loss, only the ruins of a life that had once been whole. I got out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin as I walked up to the front door. I paused for a moment, my hand resting on the doorknob, trying to summon the strength to go inside, to face whatever came next. But all I could think about was how empty it all felt, how little any of it mattered now. I opened the door and stepped inside, closing it quietly behind me. The house was dark, silent, and as I stood there in the entryway, I realized that the fight was finally over. There was nothing left to do, nothing left to say. But as I made my way upstairs, I knew that the hardest part was still to come. The part where I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of the life I had destroyed. The part where I had to face the consequences of my own actions. The part where I had to decide what kind of man I wanted to be, if there was still anything left of the man I used to be. The days following my final encounter with Eric passed in a blur. The satisfaction I'd felt from my revenge quickly faded, leaving me with a deep sense of emptiness. I had destroyed Melissa's reputation, shattered Eric's life, and now, standing among the wreckage, I realized that I was no closer to finding peace. All that remained was a hollow sense of loss and the weight of the inevitable decisions I knew I had to make. Melissa had been staying at her friend's place since the night I confronted her. The house felt like a ghost town without her, a stark contrast to the lively, if tense, atmosphere it had once had. The kids were still with me most days, and I did my best to keep things normal for them. But every time they asked about their mom, or when she'd be coming back, I felt a pang of guilt. They deserved better than this, better than the mess we'd created. But the time had come to face reality, to have the conversation I'd been dreading but knew was inevitable. We couldn't continue like this, living in limbo, pretending that everything would somehow go back to the way it was. Too much had been broken, too much trust had been destroyed. It was time to talk about divorce. I called Melissa one afternoon, after I dropped the kids off at school. My heart pounded as the phone rang, and for a moment, I almost hoped she wouldn't pick up. But she did, and the sound of her voice brought all the emotions flooding back: anger, betrayal, sadness, and a sense of finality. "Alex," she said, her voice tentative. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "We need to talk, Melissa. About what happens next." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her take a deep breath before she spoke again. "I know. I've been thinking about it too." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the house, a neutral place where we could talk without the weight of our shared memories pressing down on us. I arrived early, sitting at a corner table where I could see the door. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach as I waited, knowing that this conversation would be the final step in ending the life we'd built together. When Melissa walked in, she looked different, tired, worn down, as if the events of the past few weeks had taken their toll on her as much as they had on me. She spotted me and made her way over, her movements hesitant, as if she wasn't sure how to approach me. "Hi," she said softly, sitting down across from me. "Thanks for meeting with me." I nodded, not trusting myself to say much yet. We ordered our drinks, the small talk feeling forced and awkward, like two strangers trying to navigate an uncomfortable situation. When the coffees arrived, I finally broke the silence. "Melissa," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We both know where this is heading. There's no point in dragging it out any longer." She looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "I know," she whispered. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. About what I've done. I never wanted it to end like this, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you." "I believe that," I said, surprising myself with the honesty in my words. "But that doesn't change what you did. You betrayed me, Melissa. You lied to me, to our kids, to everyone. And I don't think there's any way to come back from that." She flinched at my words, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. All I can do now is try to make things right, as much as I can." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "We need to talk about the divorce," I said, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "I think it's the only option we have left." She nodded again, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "I agree," she said quietly. "It's not what I want, but I understand why it has to happen. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We can do this as amicably as possible, for the kids' sake." I felt a pang of relief at her words. As much as I hated what she had done, the thought of a long, drawn-out legal battle was exhausting. The last thing I wanted was to drag our children through a bitter divorce. They had already been hurt enough. "I've been thinking about the kids," I said, choosing my words carefully. "They need stability right now. And as much as I want to be with them, I think it's best if they stay with you." Melissa looked up at me, surprise flickering in her tear-stained eyes. You want them to stay with me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I do," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "You're their mother, and they need you. I'll still be in their lives, of course. I'll see them as often as I can. But they need a home, a stable environment. And right now, you're in a better position to give them that." Her lower lip quivered, and she reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "Alex, I don't deserve this. After everything I've done." I pulled my hand away, the contact too much for me to bear. "This isn't about what you deserve, Melissa. It's about the kids. We need to put them first, no matter how much we've messed up." She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure they're okay. I'll make sure they know you love them, that you'll always be there for them." "I know you will," I said, my voice steady but hollow. "But we need to be clear about the terms of the divorce. I want joint custody. I want to be involved in their lives, in their decisions. And I want to make sure they understand that this isn't their fault. That no matter what happens between us, we both love them." "Of course," she agreed quickly. "Joint custody is fair. We'll figure out a schedule that works for both of us. I don't want to keep them from you, Alex. They need their father." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief that, at least on this point, we were in agreement. "Good. We'll work it out with our lawyers. I just want to make this as easy on them as possible." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of our conversation hanging heavily between us. There was so much more that could be said, so many more things we could discuss, but at that moment, all I wanted was for this to be over. I was tired of the lies, the pain, the anger. I just wanted to find a way to move on, to start rebuilding my life. Melissa, I said, breaking the silence. I know things will never be the same between us. And I don't think I can ever forgive you for what you did. But for the kids' sake, we need to find a way to be civil. We need to put them first, no matter how much it hurts. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks again. I know, Alex. I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make this work, to make sure the kids are okay. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything, and felt a deep sense of loss. The life we had shared, the dreams we had built together, it was all gone now, reduced to nothing more than a painful memory. But as much as I wanted to hold on to the anger, to let it fuel me, I knew that wasn't the answer. The only way forward was to let go, to find a way to move on. We'll get through this, I said, more to myself than to her. We have to. For the kids. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper as she replied, for the kids. We spent the next hour discussing the logistics, who would handle the legal paperwork, how we would divide our assets, how we would explain everything to the kids. It was a cold, clinical conversation, but it was necessary. There was no room for emotion now, no space for anything but the practicalities of dismantling the life we had once shared. As we finished up, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the ending I had hoped for, but it was an ending nonetheless. And in some ways, that was enough. I'll talk to the kids tonight, I said as we stood to leave. I'll explain things to them, make sure they know what's going on. I'll be there, Melissa offered, her voice trembling. We should do it together. They need to see that we're united in this, even if we're not together anymore. I hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Okay. We'll do it together. We walked out of the coffee shop, the cool breeze hitting us as we stepped outside. For a moment, we stood there, not saying anything, just taking in the finality of it all. Then Melissa turned to me, her eyes filled with regret. Alex, she said softly. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I looked at her, searching for the anger that had fueled me for so long. But it wasn't there, not anymore. All that remained was a deep sadness, a sense of loss for what could have been. I know, I replied, my voice quiet. But it's too late for that now. She nodded, accepting my words with a sad smile. Yeah. I guess it is. With that, we said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, each of us carrying the weight of our decisions, the burden of the lives we had chosen to live. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of relief. The decision had been made, the path forward was clear. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I had to accept. When I got home, the kids were playing in the living room, their laughter filling the house with a warmth that felt almost foreign after everything that had happened. I stood in the doorway, watching them for a moment, trying to summon the strength to do what needed to be done. Hey, guys, I called out, forcing a smile as I walked over to them. Can you come here for a minute? We need to talk. Liam and Sophie looked up at me, their smiles fading as they saw the serious expression on my face. They walked over, their little faces filled with concern. What's wrong, Dad? Liam asked, his voice worried. I knelt down to their level, taking a deep breath as I prepared myself for the hardest conversation of my life. Mom and I have something to tell you, I began, my voice steady but filled with sadness. It's about what's going to happen with our family. As I spoke, Melissa walked in, her presence adding weight to the words I was saying. We explained everything to the kids as gently as we could, making sure they understood that no matter what happened, we both loved them more than anything in the world. We reassured them that they would still see both of us, that we would always be there for them, even if we weren't living together anymore. Their reactions were heartbreaking. Sophie started crying, clinging to Melissa, while Liam tried to be brave, but I could see the fear and confusion in his eyes. We held them, comforted them, did everything we could to make them feel safe. But I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of a long, difficult road. When the conversation was over, and the kids had finally settled down, I felt utterly drained. Melissa and I stood together in the living room, the weight of the day pressing down on us. There were no more words left to say, no more accusations, no more anger. All that remained was the reality of the situation we had created. I'll come by tomorrow to pick up my things, she said quietly, breaking the silence. I don't want to drag this out any longer. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat as I realized that this was it. This was the end of everything we had built together. Okay, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll be here. She gave me a sad smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Goodbye, Alex. Goodbye, Melissa, I said, watching as she turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the house that had once been our home. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty rooms, and for a moment, I just stood there, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. The kids were upstairs, already tucked into bed, and the house was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive. I walked over to the window, looking out at the darkened street, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel the full weight of the loss. The anger, the pain, the bitterness, all of it washed over me in waves, but beneath it all was a deep, aching sadness. This was the end of a chapter that had once been filled with hope and love, but had now ended in heartbreak and betrayal. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know how I was going to move forward from here. But as I stood there, staring out into the darkness, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what came next, I had to find a way to rebuild. Not just for myself, but for the kids, for the family that was still left standing, even in the aftermath of everything that had happened. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first of many that would be different, harder, but also filled with the possibility of healing. The road ahead would be long, but I had to believe that there was still something worth fighting for, something worth building from the ashes of what had been. And with that thought, I turned away from the window, ready to face whatever came next. The following days were a mix of surreal and painfully real. Melissa came by the next morning to gather her things, and while I tried to stay out of her way, it was impossible not to feel the weight of finality in every box she packed. The kids were at school, mercifully spared from the sight of their mother packing up her life and walking out of ours. We exchanged few words, mostly logistical, as she carefully selected what to take and what to leave behind. There was no need for further confrontation, we had said everything that needed to be said. But even without words, the air was thick with the unspoken regret, guilt, and the remnants of a love that had once held so much promise. As she carried the last box out to her car, she paused at the door, looking back at me with eyes that were red from crying. Alex, she started, her voice trembling. I know this doesn't mean much now, but I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. For everything. I didn't respond immediately, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I wasn't sure what to say. Forgiveness felt like a distant concept, something that belonged to a future I couldn't yet see. But I knew holding on to the anger and pain would only hurt me more in the long run. I don't know if I can forgive you, Melissa, I finally said, my voice quiet but steady. But I'll try. Not for us, but for the kids. They deserve that much. She nodded, tears spilling over as she opened her mouth to say something more, but then seemed to think better of it. Without another word, she turned and walked to her car. I watched as she drove away, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow wash over me. This was it, the end of our marriage, the end of everything we had built together. But as I closed the door behind her, I also felt something else, an unexpected sense of clarity. The life I had known was over, but a new chapter was beginning. And while I didn't know what that chapter would hold, I knew I had to face it with the same resolve that had carried me through the darkest days of my life. Over the next few weeks, we worked with our lawyers to finalize the divorce. There were no major disputes, no drawn-out battles over assets or custody. We both wanted to keep things as peaceful as possible for the sake of the kids. Melissa would keep the house, and I would move into a nearby apartment to stay close to Liam and Sophie. We settled on joint custody, with the kids spending weekdays with her and weekends with me. The legal process was straightforward, almost mechanical, as if the act of dissolving a marriage could be reduced to a series of forms and signatures. But each step brought with it a fresh wave of emotion, grief for what was lost, and anxiety about what lay ahead. The day the divorce was finalized, I sat in my lawyer's office, staring at the stack of papers in front of me. My lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Janine, explained the final steps, but her words barely registered. All I could think about was the finality of it all. Signing those papers meant closing the door on more than a decade of my life. Are you ready? Janine asked gently, pulling me out of my thoughts. I nodded, picking up the pen with a hand that felt heavier than it should. As I signed each page, I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching someone else go through the motions. When it was done, I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair, feeling both lighter and emptier than I had in months. "It's over," I said, more to myself than to Janine. She nodded, her expression sympathetic. "It's a difficult process, Alex. But you've handled it well. Now it's time to focus on moving forward." Moving forward. The words hung in the air, filled with a daunting promise. What did moving forward even look like? How do you rebuild a life after something like this? But I knew she was right. I couldn't stay stuck in the past, reliving the betrayal over and over again. I had to find a way to put it behind me, for my sake and for the kids. They needed a father who was strong, who could show them that life goes on, even after the worst has happened. I thanked Janine and left her office, stepping out into a bright, sunny day that felt at odds with the weight in my chest. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Melissa. "Alex, it's done. We're officially divorced." Her response came almost immediately. "Melissa, thank you for letting me know. I hope you're okay." I didn't reply. There wasn't much more to say. Instead, I drove home to my new apartment, a place that still felt foreign and empty despite the few belongings I'd moved in. It was smaller than the house, more modest, but it was mine. It was a place to start over. That evening, the kids came over for the first time since the move. I tried to make the apartment feel as welcoming as possible, setting up their rooms with their favorite toys and decorating the living room with family photos. When they walked in, their eyes lit up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of hope. "Dad, this is awesome!" Liam exclaimed, running to check out his new room. Sophie followed suit, her excitement bubbling over as she explored the apartment. I watched them with a smile, feeling a warmth in my chest that had been absent for far too long. This was what mattered, these moments of joy, these small but significant steps toward healing. The apartment wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to build new memories, to create a new life with my kids. We spent the evening playing board games and ordering pizza, laughing and joking as if nothing had changed. But I could see the questions in their eyes, the uncertainty about what the future held. They were still processing everything, just like I was. And it was my job to guide them through it, to show them that even though things were different, we would be okay. As I tucked them into bed that night, Sophie looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy, are we gonna be okay? You and Mommy aren't gonna be sad forever, right?" Her question hit me hard, but I forced a smile, stroking her hair gently. "We're gonna be okay, sweetheart. I promise. It might take some time, but we'll all be happy again. We just have to stick together, okay?" She nodded, satisfied with my answer, and I kissed her goodnight, turning off the light and leaving her room. As I closed the door, I leaned against the wall, letting out a long breath. The road ahead was going to be tough, but I knew I had to be strong for them and for myself. Over the next few months, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The kids adjusted to the new routine, and while there were moments of sadness and confusion, they gradually adapted to the changes. Melissa and I kept things civil, focusing on co-parenting and making sure the kids' needs were met. We communicated regularly, but our interactions were brief and to the point, avoiding any mention of the past. There were still days when the pain would hit me out of nowhere, a memory, a song, a place we used to go together. But I learned to manage it, to let the grief wash over me without letting it consume me. I focused on the positives, on the time I spent with the kids, on the small victories that came with rebuilding my life. I also started to reach out to friends, reconnecting with people I had drifted away from during my marriage. It wasn't easy at first. I felt like I had forgotten how to be social, how to talk about anything other than the divorce. But with time, I found comfort in those connections, in the simple act of being with people who cared about me. One evening, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected text from Melissa. "Melissa, would you like to grab coffee sometime? I think we should talk about how things are going for the kids." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. We had been civil, even cooperative, but the idea of sitting down with her again, outside the context of lawyers or custody arrangements, felt strange. But she was right, we needed to make sure we were on the same page, for the kids' sake.
Alex, sure. Let's meet this weekend.
We agreed on a time and place, and when Saturday arrived, I found myself sitting across from her in the same coffee shop where we had discussed the divorce months earlier. This time, the atmosphere was less tense, but still tinged with the weight of everything that had happened. "Thanks for meeting me," Melissa said, her tone tentative. "I just thought it would be good for us to check in, see how things are going." "I agree," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "The kids seem to be doing okay, but I know they're still adjusting." She nodded, stirring her coffee absently. "Yeah, they've had a lot of questions. I try to answer them as best I can, but it's hard. I wish I could make it easier for them." "We both do," I said, a hint of sadness creeping into my voice.
"But they're strong.
They'll get through this." We fell into a comfortable silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. It was strange, being here with her, talking like we used to, but knowing that things would never be the same.
But maybe that was okay. Maybe we could find a way to move forward, even if it wasn't together.
After a while, Melissa looked up at me, her expression softening.
"Alex, I just want you to know that I'm really proud of how you've handled all of this.
I know it hasn't been easy, but you've been amazing with the kids.
They're lucky to have you."
I felt a lump in my throat at her words, but I pushed it down, managing a small smile.
"Thanks, Melissa. I'm just doing what I can." "We both are."
She smiled back, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had once loved. The woman I had built a life with, before everything had gone so wrong. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by the reality of our situation. We finished our coffee and said our goodbyes, both of us knowing that while the chapter of our marriage was closed, a new one was beginning. One where we could be parents to our kids, even if we couldn't be partners anymore. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't felt before. The anger, the bitterness, they were still there, but they were fading, replaced by something else.
Acceptance. Understanding. Maybe even a little bit of peace. Life would never be the same, but it would go on.
And as I drove home to my apartment, I felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. The road ahead was still uncertain, still filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. I had been through hell and back, but I was still standing.
And that was something. In the end, I knew I would be okay. The kids would be okay.
And that was all that really mattered.